Okay, so today we're diving deep into a question that I know has been on a lot of your minds,
Yeah.
and it's a big one. Um, why is there suffering in the world?
Mm.
Especially if we're thinking about the idea of like a perfect God, right?
Right.
All powerful, all good, all loving, all that jazz.
All the good stuff.
And your sources for this episode really go straight at this question, looking at how these ideas about God clash with just like the reality that there is pain and suffering in the world.
Right.
So what we want to do today is really unpack this problem and see if we can maybe understand it in a new way.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating is that this question of suffering,
Mm.
uh, it's not new.
Right.
It's something that people have been wrestling with for centuries across so many different cultures and
Yeah,
traditions.
sure.
And the sources you sent really highlight that evolution of thought.
Mm.
And we see it going from these ancient Babylonian myths where the gods could just, inflict suffering out of like annoyance or whim
Right.
to more, developed ideas in early Jewish thought
Mm.
that tied suffering to divine justice.
Yeah.
Like the idea that suffering is a consequence of unrighteousness.
Okay.
So you see this attempt to bring some kind of order or explanation to the problem,
That makes sense.
but it actually makes the problem even more complicated, right?
I see what you mean. Yeah, because if you start with this idea of a God who is perfectly just and good,
Right.
then the amount of suffering we see, the intensity of it, it doesn't seem to add up.
Exactly. And that's where you get this problem of evil,
Right.
which scholars like Professor Herman and your sources talk about. It becomes this major challenge to the whole idea of a loving God.
Right.
Because if God is all powerful and all good, why doesn't he stop evil and suffering?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
And throughout history, there have been so many different attempts to answer that question,
Infinitely.
but none of them seem to fully satisfy, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
like one common explanation is the idea that God tests humanity through suffering.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that one.
But does that really hold up?
I don't know.
Especially when you think about people who can't even grasp the concept of a test.
Oh, like children.
Like children, exactly, or people facing just unimaginable horrors.
Yeah.
What kind of test is that?
Right.
Then there's the soul-making theory
Okay.
that suggests suffering is necessary for us to develop character and virtue.
I've heard that one too.
But again, it's hard to reconcile that with the sheer amount of pointless suffering we see in the world,
Right.
like suffering caused by natural disasters or just senseless acts of cruelty.
Yeah, what kind of character building is happening in, a devastating earthquake or something?
Exactly. And then you have the free will argument,
Okay.
which says that suffering is an inevitable consequence of humans having the freedom to choose.
Which makes sense for some things.
It does for some things, but it doesn't explain the suffering of those who don't have free will.
Right, like animals.
Like animals, exactly, or infants.
Right.
They're not making moral choices that lead to their suffering.
Yeah, and what about the law of karma?
Oh, yes, karma.
It's this idea that suffering is the result of our past actions,
Right, cause and effect.
Exactly. But even that raises questions.
For sure.
Like, what about the suffering of beings that don't seem to have much agency or control over their actions?
That's a really interesting point.
Right. So it seems like all these common explanations, they might offer some comfort in certain situations.
Yeah,
But they don't really get to the heart of the problem.
they don't. And that's why I think it's so fascinating to look at this completely different perspective that comes up in one of your sources.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's from Hindu philosophy, and it centers around this idea of Maya.
Maya, okay, I'm not familiar with that.
So Maya is basically the concept that the world as we perceive it with all its joys and sorrows,
Yeah.
it's not actually the ultimate reality.
What do you mean?
It's like an illusion.
Okay, whoa.
It's seen as a manifestation of Brahman's Leela,
Romans Leela.
which is like the divine play.
The divine play.
Yeah, think of it like a huge cosmic drama
Okay.
where everything we experience, including suffering, is just part of this much bigger unfolding story.
So you're saying that the world is like a stage?
In a way, yes.
And all the suffering we see, it's just like a scene in this grand play.
Exactly. And from this perspective, suffering isn't the fundamental truth of our existence.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
And that's where the Bhagavad Gita comes in.
Okay. One of your sources talks about that, right?
Yes. It emphasizes the importance of understanding Atman, which is our true self.
Okay.
And Atman exists beyond this illusion of Maya.
So Atman is like who we really are.
Exactly.
And it's not affected by all the ups and downs of this world.
Exactly. It transcends all the temporary experiences of this perceived reality.
That's pretty profound.
It is, and it completely changes how we understand suffering.
Okay, so how does it change things?
Well, instead of trying to find a logical explanation for suffering within this illusion,
Right.
Hindu philosophy says that the path to understanding is about realizing our oneness with Brahman.
Brahman.
Brahman is the ultimate reality, the source of everything.
Okay, so Atman is part of Brahman.
Exactly. Atman is like the individual soul, which is ultimately one with Brahman, the universal consciousness.
So we're all connected to this ultimate reality.
We are. And realizing that connection is what brings true peace and liberation from suffering.
That makes sense. Intellectual explanations can only go so far.
They can, but when we experience that deeper connection with Brahman,
Yeah.
that's where true solace comes from.
It's not about figuring out why bad things happen.
No.
It's about understanding that our true nature is beyond all of that.
Precisely.
And it's that realization that allows us to transcend suffering.
Exactly.
It's like suffering becomes less of this huge injustice that we have to make sense of,
Yeah,
and more like just a passing scene in this grand divine play.
that's a beautiful way to put it.
And one of your sources even says that the knower of Atman transcends sorrow.
It's true. Realizing our true self allows us to move beyond the grip of suffering.
So this is like a whole different way of looking at things.
It's a journey of self-realization,
Right.
and it reframes our entire experience.
Instead of asking, why is there suffering?
We shift our focus to how do we transcend it.
And that's where the idea of Maya and realizing our connection to Brahman comes in.
Exactly. It's about recognizing a deeper, more fundamental reality.
So this deep dive has taken us pretty far from, the usual ways of thinking about suffering.
Yes.
Instead of trying to reconcile suffering with the idea of a perfect God within our normal understanding of the world,
Right.
Hindu philosophy through Maya and the path of self-realization suggests that suffering is part of an illusion that we can move beyond.
Exactly. By understanding our true selves and our connection to the ultimate reality.
Wow, this has given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And I hope it's given our listeners something to consider as well.
Definitely.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening.
Okay.
How might this idea of an illusionary reality change the way you view your own struggles and challenges?
Yeah.
Would seeing them as temporary parts of a much bigger play?
Offer you a different kind of understanding, maybe even a sense of liberation?
It's worth exploring.
It definitely is. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Absolutely.
Until next time.
See you then.